Hello, everyone. So, today we are going to talk about the determinants of classical conditioning. So, how quickly and strongly is the conditioned response being acquired or learned? It depends on many factors. So, that's what we are going to study today. The first factor is definitely the time relations between stimuli. So, these are the time relations between the onset of conditioned stimulus, which is the bell, and the unconditioned stimulus, which is the food. So, very clearly, we have two very important procedures. We have the forward conditioning procedures, and we also have the backward conditioning procedure. So, under the forward conditioning, we have three very important procedures. So, let us firstly understand what is the meaning of a forward conditioning and a backward conditioning procedure. So, a forward conditioning procedure occurs very clearly when the conditioned stimulus, which is the bell, it will appear just before and during the presentation of the unconditioned stimulus, which is the food. And backward conditioning involves the presentation of the conditioned stimulus after the unconditioned stimulus. And usually it results in no learning at all, you know. So, very clearly in backward conditioning, the bell is going to ring after the presentation of food. And in forward conditioning, the bell will ring before the presentation of food. So, when we talk about the first one, which is the simultaneous conditioning, here the conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus, they are presented together. And that is why the term simultaneous. In the delayed conditioning, the onset of the conditioned stimulus takes place before the onset of unconditioned stimulus, and the conditioned stimulus will end before the end of the unconditioned stimulus. So, very clearly, the bell will ring first and then the food will be presented in case of the delayed conditioning. In trace conditioning, the onset and the end of the conditioned stimulus will occur before the onset of the unconditioned stimulus. And of course, there is going to be a time gap between the two. This time gap will be there between the ringing of the bell and the presentation of food. So, first the bell will ring, there is going to be a time gap, and then the food will be presented. In case of backward conditioning, very clearly, the unconditioned stimulus will be presented before the conditioned stimulus. So the food will be brought first and then the bell will ring. So out of these four, actually, the most effective is the delayed conditioning because it's the most effective in case of acquisition of a conditioned response. When we talk about simultaneous and when we talk about the trace conditioning, they also in a way lead to acquisition of the conditioned response, but greater number of acquisition trials are required in case of simultaneous and trace in comparison to the delayed conditioning procedures. So the number of acquisition trials required in case of delayed are probably lesser if we compare it with simultaneous and trace. There probably we would need to repeat the procedures. We would need to conduct many acquisition trials in order to basically acquire the conditioned response or to learn the conditioned response. Greater number of trials are required in case of the simultaneous and trace as compared to delayed. So, this is what actually makes the delayed most effective in the acquisition of the conditioned response. And of course, in backward, it's very rare that you probably will acquire the response in a way, conditioned response. It's quite rare because no learning essentially is taking place in case of the backward conditioning. So then, of course, we have the types of unconditioned stimuli. So here we are talking about definitely the food. So the unconditioned stimuli is of two types. We have the appetitive and aversive. So appetitive, if you come to see, it's more of a, positive reinforcer, you can say, you know. And so basically, it will always be approached by the organism, you know. And no wonder it's the appetitive stimulus for this reason. So we probably can say that appetitive unconditioned stimuli, it's going to, in a very natural way, very automatically, it's going to elicit or maybe trigger the approach responses. The organism wants to go and do it, you know. It sort of attracts the organism, like, we have seen responses like eating, drinking, so these come under the appetitive unconditioned stimuli. And definitely, these are the stimuli which are eliciting these approach responses. You, in a way, want to do it. You easily get approached. You easily want to exhibit, or so to say, you want to quickly reach out to it. You know, so how we exhibit responses like eating, drinking. So it all pertains to these appetitive, unconditioned stimuli. So these responses that they are going to actually elicit, they are basically very satisfactory, and so to say, we can say that they are involving pleasure, very clearly. So then, of course, we have aversive unconditioned stimuli, you know. So here, basically, we can say that, they are those unconditioned stimulus, maybe, which are going to be very painful, which are going to be very harmful, you know. So basically, they could be like noise, bitter taste, electric shocks, painful injections. And they are going to trigger avoidance, or they are going to trigger escapist attitude in us, escapist, or maybe escape responses in a person, you know. So appetitive classical conditioning is slightly slower than the the other one, which is, of course, the aversive classical conditioning, because that is, of course, little faster, because the reason being that in case of the appetitive classical conditioning, you require greater number of acquisition trials, but of course, in aversive classical conditioning, maybe you can establish that kind of response, whether it is to do with an escape response or whether it is to do with an avoidance response, in just maybe 2 to 3 trials only. And it all depends on the intensity of the aversive unconditioned stimulus, very clearly. So, of course, then we do have the third one, which is the intensity of the conditioned stimuli. Now, the intensity here actually means that the more the conditioned stimulus is intense, the fewer will be the number of acquisition trials needed for the conditioning. So, how strong is the conditioned stimulus? How intense is the conditioned stimulus? So, the number of acquisition trials would be lesser there. They will be probably lesser in number. We probably will not require too many trials if the intensity of the conditioned stimulus is quite good. It's quite intense that way. So, this was all about the determinants of classical conditioning. Thank you so much, everyone.